What more can you tell us?
Well, as you said, we know that there's at least 10 people have been killed. We're told around 15 have been injured. TV coverage has been showing a large number of ambulances rushing to local hospitals. We haven't had an official figure for the casualties yet. That's still yet to come. But the area where the bomb explosion occurred it was right outside the famous Blue Mosque on one side of Sultanahmet Square. It's the main area that tourists visit in Istanbul. There's been some speculation that possibly the tourists who were injured or who were victims of the explosion may have been from Japan or East Asia. Certainly, visitors from East Asia tend to make up the bulk of tourist visitors to Istanbul at this time of year. But the square itself is popular with pretty well everybody who comes here.
TRT World is reporting, David, that it's believed to be a suicide bombing. Of course, nobody has come forward and claimed responsibility as yet, but who are the likely culprits?
Well, yeah, there's been a couple of eyewitnesses interviewed who said that they thought it was a suicide bombing. Who could be possibly responsible? I think it's rather difficult to say. Certainly, the Islamic State group, who've been responsible for 3 suicide bombings over the past 8 months, are a prime candidate. But also in the past, some Kurdish groups, some left-wing groups, they've also employed these horror tactics and attacked tourists.
And
so really, it's probably a little bit early to decide who could have been responsible.
Yes, and just in terms of visitor figures at this time of the year, well, of course it is winter and in that part of the world. I mean, as we've been talking about, Istanbul is the 6th most visited city in the world, and it's a city always jam-packed of tourists.
Yeah, it's as you say, it's the 6th most popular city destination in the world. This is possibly the lowest period of the year. I think January, February is the period when the lowest number of tourists come. There's certainly very few tourists around from Western European countries. But as I mentioned, it's still a period when a lot of visitors appear from East Asia, and they obviously have a different holiday seasons.
And the country, of course, has been on high alert since last year's series of suicide bombings occurred in the south of the country and also in Ankara.
That's right, yes. Really, even from before that, the security situation in Turkey has been increasingly worrying. Since the Syrian civil war started, there's been, well, as we know from reports in the Western media for the last few years, there's been a steady flow of Islamist volunteers coming through Turkey and going into Syria and Iraq. A lot of those people have also come back through Turkey. The first Islamic State incident that I can recall happening inside Turkey was actually 2 Albanians who were driving back from Syria across Turkey. They were stopped by the police and they shot the police dead. Now, they were carrying weapons. They'd been able to come across the Syrian border carrying their weapons, and it wasn't until they shot somebody dead that they were captured. And the fear since then has been that there's been a steady flow of both militants and weapons going both ways across the border. And what's especially worrying is that the Turkish authorities don't really seem to know the extent to which this is happening.
David, there's something you was telling us earlier that as a long-time resident of the city, you yourself have reached a point, given the high concerns surrounding security, that you're even thinking of leaving. I mean, does that give us a sense as a viewer, how tense the situation has become in Istanbul?
Well, I wouldn't say I'd actually definitely considered leaving, but I had been wondering for how much longer it will be safe to stay here. I know I'm not alone in that. I know a lot of foreign residents here, and several people have left already. And I know a number of people are also questioning how long it will continue to be safe to stay here. Not just because of the threat of terrorist attacks, but also I think we can say increasingly extreme attitudes of the government in Ankara. A lot of people are very concerned about freedom of the press. There's increasing pressure on the media to toe the government line, and also, other small, niggling bureaucratic issues. For example, the issuing of residence permits, work permits. The process has become increasingly more difficult, increasingly more prolonged. I'm currently waiting to see if I'm going to be given a residence permit for this year. I've got no clue whether I will be given one. It's simply a series of I'd say almost an attitude from the government in Ankara that we're getting the feeling that they don't really want us here anymore.
David, with that in mind, what do you think the government's response will be to this suicide bombing?
I'd imagine they'll try and play it down as they did with the Ankara bombing and the Suruç bombing. I think possibly the most frightening thing about the Ankara bombing, where over 100 people were killed, right in the centre of the Turkish capital, was the speed with which it fell off the local news agenda. The people who were responsible where they were known to police. They were being sought by the police, but they hadn't been arrested. The place where they collected together and organised in Adıyaman in southern Turkey was well known to the authorities. Neighbours who were aware of what these people were doing had warned the authorities, and nothing had been done.